Captain Ethan Wright stood on the bridge of the UES Voyager, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The stars looked different out here at the edge of the solar system. Colder, more distant. After 15 years in space, he thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Officer Ben Collins, his fingers dancing across the sensor panel. "It's not like anything I've seen before." Ethan moved to stand behind Collins. "Show me." The screen displayed a wave pattern that pulsed with an odd rhythm. Not random, but not immediately recognizable either. "Is it natural?" Ethan asked. Dr. Olivia Ward, the ship's science officer, shook her head. "No natural phenomenon creates patterns this regular. This is a signal, Captain. Someone is trying to communicate." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. After generations of searching the stars, humanity had finally found what it was looking for. They weren't alone. "Send a standard greeting package," Ethan ordered, "and alert Earth." For 3 days they waited. The signal continued unchanged. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, a new signal appeared. Stronger, clearer. "Captain, you need to see this," called Collins. "Something huge just dropped out of. I don't even know what. It wasn't there a second ago." The view screen showed what could only be described as a ship, but it dwarfed the Voyager like a whale next to a minnow. Its surface gleamed with an iridescent material that seemed to shift colors as they watched. "Are they scanning us?" Ethan asked. "Yes, sir," said Collins. "Very thoroughly." A new signal came through, this time with images and sounds that the ship's computer quickly translated into English. "They're requesting permission to send a representative aboard," said Officer Judy Price from Communications. "They call themselves the Galactic Confederacy." Ethan hesitated only briefly. "Grant permission. Prepare docking bay 3. An hour later, Ethan stood with a small welcoming party as a shuttle from the alien vessel docked with the Voyager. The airlock cycled, and then he was face to face with humanity's first alien visitor. Ambassador Israel stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin the color of a deep ocean and 4 arms that moved with elegant precision. His large eyes blinked vertically instead of horizontally. "Captain Wright," the alien said, his voice translated through a device on his chest. "I bring greetings from the 17 species of the Galactic Confederacy." "Welcome aboard the Voyager," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're honored to meet you." Zrel's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "We have been observing Earth for some time. Your species has progressed quickly." Ethan led the ambassador to the ship's conference room, where they sat across from each other. Dr. Ward and Lieutenant John Murray joined them. "The Confederacy is an alliance of spacefaring civilizations," Zrel explained. "We share knowledge, resources, and protection. We would like to extend an invitation to humanity to join us." Ethan felt a surge of excitement. "That's an incredible offer. We would be very interested in." "But not as equals," Zrel interrupted. "Not yet." The excitement in the room chilled. "I don't understand," said Dr. Ward. Zrel placed all 4 hands flat on the table. "Humanity is young, untested. Each species must prove its worth before taking its place in the Confederacy." "Prove our worth? How?" Ethan asked. "Through a tradition as old as the Confederacy itself," said Zrel. "A contest between champions, one of yours against one of ours." Lieutenant Murray frowned. "A fight, a duel," corrected Zrel. "Of skill, intelligence, and spirit. The outcome determines your initial standing within our alliance." "And if we refuse?" asked Dr. Ward. Zrel's eyes blinked slowly. "Then we leave. You continue your isolated existence. But know this, there are other forces in the galaxy less benevolent than the Confederacy. Without our protection, it is only a matter of time before you encounter them." Ethan looked at his officers, then back at the ambassador. "We need to discuss this with our government." "Of course," said Zrel. "You have 14 Earth days to decide. Most species see the wisdom in accepting. Most also begin their membership at the lowest tier, serving the established races for at least a century before earning greater privileges. As the ambassador returned to his shuttle, Ethan stared out the viewport at the massive alien ship. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries. Proof they weren't alone in the universe. But no one had imagined first contact would come with a challenge. The greatest test in human history had just begun. The news of alien contact spread across Earth like wildfire. Within days, the entire planet knew about the Galactic Confederacy and their challenge. World leaders gathered at the United Earth Government headquarters in Geneva to meet with Ambassador Duel. Ethan watched from the side of the room as President Laura Daniels addressed the alien diplomat. The chamber was packed with government officials, military officers, and scientific advisors. "We understand the importance of your offer," President Daniels said, her voice firm despite the pressure of the moment. "But we need more information about this duel before we can accept." Ambassador Israel nodded, his blue skin shimmering under the lights. "The challenge has 3 parts: combat, intelligence, and spirit. Each new species must face these trials. It is how we determine your place among us." "And if we lose?" asked General Frank Powell. "You will still join the Confederacy," Zrel replied. "But at the lowest tier, your people would serve the higher races for a century, providing resources and labor. Think of it as an apprenticeship." A murmur ran through the room. No one liked the sound of that. "And if we win?" President Daniels asked. "A higher standing, more freedom, access to certain technologies." Zrel's 4 arms moved in a fluid gesture, but I must be honest, no new species has achieved more than middle tier in over 5,000 years. Lieutenant Samantha Miller stood in the back of the room, listening carefully. At 32, she was one of the youngest officers to reach her rank in the United Earth Fleet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes missed nothing. "Who would our champion face?" she asked suddenly. All eyes turned to her. Ethan frowned. It wasn't her place to speak, but he knew Samantha well enough to know she had a reason. Zrel seemed amused. "Kraz, from the Draxian system. He has represented the Confederacy in 17 previous duels." "And won them all?" Samantha asked. "Naturally." The room fell silent again. President Daniels called for a recess, and the Earth officials gathered in a separate chamber to discuss. "This is insane," said General Powell. "They're setting us up to fail." "We don't have much choice," replied Dr. Ward, who had come from the Voyager with Ethan. "If we refuse, we're on our own against whatever else is out there." "What do we know about this Kraz?" President Daniels asked. Dr. Ward pulled up the limited data they had. Reptilian species, about 7 feet tall, extremely strong and durable. Their species has been part of the Confederacy for over 10,000 years. "We need more time," someone said. Samantha stepped forward. "We have 3 months. That's what Zrel told Captain Wright." Ethan nodded confirmation. The duel would take place on Mars. Neutral ground, they called it. For hours, they debated their options. Some wanted to refuse. Others suggested they try to negotiate different terms. As the discussion went in circles, Samantha finally stood up. "I'll do it," she said simply. "I'll be Earth's champion." Ethan stared at her in shock. "Lieutenant, you can't be serious." "I am," she replied. "I studied every bit of data we have on the aliens. I have the highest tactical scores in the fleet, and I've won the Solar Combat Championship 3 years running." General Powell looked skeptical. "Against this Kraz creature, you've seen the specs. With respect, sir, they expect us to send our strongest warrior. Someone big and powerful who will try to match Kraz in combat." Samantha's eyes were determined. "That's exactly why we shouldn't do that. We need to be unpredictable." President Daniels studied her carefully. "You really think you can win?" "I think I can surprise them," Samantha replied. "And that's our best chance." Later that evening, Ethan found Samantha in the building's gym, already training. "This is crazy, Sam," he said quietly. "You know what we're up against." She paused. wiping sweat from her forehead. When my brother died on Orbital Station 4, everyone said humans weren't ready for deep space. That we should stay in our own backyard. Her eyes met his. I've spent my whole life proving them wrong. I'm not stopping now. The next day, they informed Ambassador Zrel of their decision. The alien's vertical eyelids blinked rapidly, the first sign of surprise he had shown. "This is your champion?" he asked, looking down at Samantha. "I am," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. Zrel seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Very well. The duel will begin in exactly 3 Earth months. I suggest you use that time wisely, Lieutenant Miller." As Zrel departed, Samantha turned to Ethan. "Now the real work begins." Time moved quickly after Samantha's decision. The United Earth government built a special training facility in the Arizona desert where she could prepare away from prying eyes. Every day brought new challenges as humanity scrambled to ready their champion. Dr. Alan Russo arrived on a hot Tuesday morning. As Earth's leading xenobiologist, he had been studying the limited data on the Confederacy species since first contact. "Lieutenant Miller," he said, shaking Samantha's hand, "I've been looking at everything we know about Kraz's species." They sat in the facility's conference room, surrounded by screens showing alien anatomy. Samantha drank water as she listened. "The Draxians have several advantages," Dr. Russo explained. "Their skin is like armor. Their muscles are denser than ours. They can see heat patterns, and they have 2 hearts." Samantha nodded. "Weaknesses. They're slow to change direction. Their joints don't rotate like ours." Dr. Russo pulled up a simulation, and they rely on instinct in combat. They don't adapt quickly to new situations. "That I can use," Samantha said. Later that day, engineer Lisa Grant joined their team. She brought with her a black case. "The best adaptive combat gear we could make on short notice," Lisa said, opening the case. Inside was a sleek, form-fitting suit. "It has microhydraulics to boost your strength and speed. The fabric can harden instantly to absorb impacts." Samantha ran her fingers over the material. "Will it work against Kraz?" Lisa smiled. "We designed it based on Dr. Russo's data. It's not enough to match his strength, but it should help level the playing field." Day after day, Samantha trained. In the morning, she worked on physical conditioning and combat techniques. In the afternoon, she studied alien psychology and Confederacy history. At night, she ran simulations against a computer model of Kraz. On the other side of the planet, in a special habitat built for him, Kraz prepared in his own way. Ambassador Zrel reported that the alien champion had entered a ritual meditation phase, focusing his mind and body for the coming duel. He sees this as a formality, Zrel told Captain Wright during one of their meetings. "No offense intended, but humans are not considered a serious challenge." Ethan kept his face neutral. "We'll see." 2 months into training, Samantha was sparring with 3 combat robots when Captain Wright arrived. He watched her move, noting how much faster she had become. When the session ended, they walked together around the indoor track. "How are you holding up?" Ethan asked. "I'm ready," she said, though dark circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "Sam," he said gently, "you can't keep pushing like this. You need rest too." She stopped walking. "Do you know what Zrel told President Daniels yesterday? If we lose, they'll take 20% of Earth's water as part of our contribution to the Confederacy." 20%, Ethan. He stared at her. "They didn't tell me that." "It's not just about pride anymore," she said. "There's real stakes here." That evening, Dr. Russo called an emergency meeting. His face was grim as the team gathered. "I've been analyzing the footage of previous duels that Zrel provided," he said. "There's something strange about the final trial, the Spirit Challenge. No one ever scores well on it, even species that win the first 2 trials." "What does that mean?" asked Lisa. "I'm not sure," Dr. Russo admitted, "but I think the game might be rigged." On the other side of the facility, A man named Gregory Peters worked alone. The government had brought him in 3 weeks ago. As a quantum physicist who specialized in communication systems, his job was to analyze the Confederacy's technology. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Something in their transmission patterns bothered him. It was as if there was a message hidden beneath the obvious one, a subtext he couldn't quite grasp. "There's more to this challenge than they're telling us," he muttered to himself as he ran another analysis. On her bed, Samantha stared at the ceiling. 1 month remained before the duel. In her mind, she ran through every scenario, every possibility. Failure wasn't an option, not just for her brother's memory now, but for all of humanity. Outside her window, millions of people around the world watched news reports about the upcoming duel. Some prayed, some prepared for the worst. All wondered what would happen when humanity faced its first real test among the stars. 1 month before the duel, Ambassador Zrel requested a meeting with Earth's leaders. They gathered once more in Geneva, this time with Samantha present. The blue-skinned alien stood at the front of the room, all 4 arms clasped behind his back. "The time has come to explain the format of the challenge," Zrel announced. "As is tradition, there will be 3 trials." Screens around the room lit up with images from past duels. Samantha studied them carefully, looking for any clue that might help her. "First is combat," Zrel continued. "You will face Kraz in physical contest. The weapons are non-lethal, but can cause pain. Victory comes from either surrender or reaching 10 points of contact." President Daniels leaned forward. "What kind of weapons?" Zrel gestured, and one of his assistants brought forward a case. Inside were 2 identical devices that looked like short staffs. "These can extend, contract, and bend according to the user's will," Zrel explained. "They can also deliver a shock that temporarily numbs the area struck." Samantha picked one up, feeling its weight. It was lighter than it looked. "The second trial tests intelligence," Zrel went on. "Each champion must solve a complex logical puzzle while under stress. The faster you solve it, the higher your score." "What kind of stress?" General Powell asked. "That varies," Zrel replied vaguely. "It might be time pressure, physical discomfort, or sensory confusion." Samantha nodded. She had been training for this, spending hours solving problems while running on a treadmill or with loud noises blasting around her. "And the third trial?" President Daniels asked. Zrel's expression became unreadable. "The spirit trial is difficult to explain in your language. It tests what truly drives a species, their core nature." Dr. Rousseau, sitting beside Samantha, frowned. "That's very vague, Ambassador." "It is meant to be," Zrel said. "The spirit trial is different for each contestant. Preparing for it would defeat its purpose." After the meeting, Samantha met with her team. They gathered in a secure room to discuss what they had learned. "I don't like the sound of this spirit trial," Lisa said. "How do we prepare for something we don't understand?" Dr. Rousseau nodded. "It's concerning. In the footage I've studied, no species scores well on it, almost as if it's designed that way." Captain Wright paced the room. "We need to focus on what we can control." "Samantha, how do you feel about the combat portion?" "I've been training with similar weapons," she replied. "I can handle it. The puzzle part too. It's the spirit trial that worries me." Gregory Peters knocked on the door then, his hair messy as if he hadn't slept. He rarely joined their meetings, preferring to work alone. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice urgent. He set up his computer and displayed a series of wave patterns. "This is the standard communication signal from the Confederacy ships," he explained. "But look here." He zoomed in on a section. There's a secondary pattern embedded within it, almost like a whisper behind the main voice. "What does it mean?" Samantha asked. "I'm not sure yet," Gregory admitted. "But it's deliberate. They're sending 2 messages at once. The official one we all hear, and something else." Captain Wright frowned. "Is it a threat?" "I don't think so." Gregory ran his hand through his hair. "The pattern doesn't match any known threat signals. It's more like an alternative perspective. Samantha looked at the pattern. Can you decode it? I'm trying. I need more time. Over the next 2 weeks, preparations intensified. Samantha trained harder than ever. The combat suit was finished, with last-minute improvements based on new data. Dr. Rousseau compiled everything they knew about Kraz's fighting style and puzzle-solving abilities. Meanwhile, Gregory worked day and night on the hidden signal. 3 days before the duel, he called Samantha to his lab. "I've got it," he said, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "It's not a complete message, but I understand parts of it now." "What does it say?" she asked. He looked up at her, his expression troubled. "I think some members of the Confederacy are trying to tell us something about the real purpose of these duels. And if I'm right, there's much more at stake than just our standing in their alliance." "Tell me everything," Samantha said. As Gregory explained his findings, Samantha realized that the coming duel might be about something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The day of the duel arrived with a red sunrise over the Martian landscape. A massive dome had been built on the planet's surface, filled with breathable air and Earth-normal gravity. Around it, ships from all 17 Confederacy species hovered, their lights twinkling like new stars. Samantha stood in the preparation room, wearing her combat suit. Captain Wright, Dr. Rousseau, and Lisa were with her. Gregory was still on Earth, working frantically to decode more of the hidden message. "Remember your training," Lisa said as she checked the suit's systems one last time. "The suit will amplify your movements, but don't rely on it too much." Dr. Rousseau handed Samantha a small device. "Put this in your ear. It will help us communicate if we can. The Confederacy might block our signals, though." Captain Wright put his hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, Sam. All of Earth is watching." And they were. Billions of people had gathered around screens all over the planet. Schools were closed. Work had stopped. Everyone was watching as humanity faced its first interstellar challenge. Ambassador Zrel entered the room. "It is time, Lieutenant Miller." Samantha took a deep breath and followed him through a long corridor that led to the main arena. The space was circular, about 100 feet across, with walls that curved up to form a dome. Seats surrounded it, filled with aliens of every shape and size. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange she couldn't tell which end was their head. On the far side, another door opened. Kraz entered. He was even more impressive in person than in the images Samantha had studied. Nearly 7 feet tall, with green-gray skin that looked like armor plating. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and his powerful tail swung slowly behind him. A voice boomed through the arena, speaking in multiple languages at once. Samantha recognized it as the Grand Arbiter, the official who would oversee the duel. Champions approached the center. Samantha walked forward, feeling the eyes of thousands of aliens on her. Kraz moved with surprising grace for his size. They stopped 5 feet apart. "The combat trial will begin," announced the Arbiter. "Take your weapons." 2 pedestals rose from the floor, each holding one of the staff-like weapons Zrel had shown them earlier. Samantha picked hers up, feeling it hum with energy in her hand. Kraz took his weapon and gave Samantha a slight bow. "May your defeat be honorable," he said, his voice deep and rumbling. Before Samantha could respond, the floor beneath them lit up. The Arbiter spoke again. "Begin." Kraz moved with surprising speed, his weapon extending to twice its length as he swung at Samantha. She barely had time to dodge, feeling the air rush past her face. She rolled away, using the suit's enhanced speed to put distance between them. As she moved, she felt the gravity in the arena shift. Suddenly she was lighter, almost floating. The aliens in the audience murmured. This was unexpected. "Variable gravity field," Dr. Rousseau said in her ear. "They're changing the conditions." Samantha adapted quickly. She pushed off the ground, using the lower gravity to leap higher than normally possible. Kraz seemed confused by her movement, swinging his weapon where she had been a moment before. She twisted in midair and struck down with her staff, landing a hit on Kraz's shoulder. A light flashed in the arena. "Point to Earth's champion," the arbiter announced. Kraz's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected to be hit first. He attacked with new determination, his movements powerful but predictable. The gravity shifted again, now heavier than Earth normal. Samantha felt her body strain against the increased weight. Her suit compensated somewhat, but she was still at a disadvantage. Kraz saw his opportunity. He charged forward, his weapon splitting into 3 flexible parts that came at her from different angles. Samantha couldn't dodge them all. One struck her leg, sending a numbing shock through her body. Another light flashed. "Point to the Confederacy champion." For the next 20 minutes, they battled across the changing arena. The gravity shifted repeatedly, sometimes lighter, sometimes heavier. Parts of the floor raised or lowered, creating obstacles and platforms. Kraz was stronger, but Samantha was more adaptable. Each time the conditions changed, he took longer to adjust his strategy. She used this to her advantage, scoring points when he was disoriented. The final score stood at 9-8. Samantha needed just 1 more point to win the combat trial. Kraz needed 2. The gravity suddenly dropped to almost nothing. Both champions floated upward. Kraz seemed confused, his tail thrashing uselessly in the air. Samantha saw her chance. She pushed off the wall, propelling herself toward him. At the last moment, she twisted, avoiding his weapon and bringing her staff down on his back. The arena transformed for the second trial. Walls rose from the floor, creating a maze-like structure. In the center, 2 identical stations appeared with glowing screens and strange controls. "The intelligence trial will now begin," announced the arbiter. "Each champion must solve the puzzle before them. You will face distractions and pressure. Speed and accuracy determine your score." Samantha and Kraz were led to opposite sides of the arena. Dr. Russo spoke quietly in her ear. "Remember your training. Stay focused no matter what happens." Samantha nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her. She approached her station and examined the controls. They were unlike anything she had trained with. Alien symbols flashed across the screen. "Begin," called the arbiter. The symbols on the screen started moving, rearranging themselves into patterns. Samantha realized it was a kind of sorting problem. She needed to predict how the symbols would move and guide them to their correct positions. She worked quickly, her fingers dancing across the controls. As she did, the floor beneath her began to heat up. Soon it was uncomfortable, then painful. Sweat dripped down her face. Heat distraction. She heard Dr. Russo say, "Regulate your breathing." Across the arena, Kraz worked at his station. The reptilian seemed unbothered by the heat. Of course, his species naturally preferred higher temperatures. The symbols became more complex. Now they moved in 3 dimensions, spinning and twisting. Samantha struggled to keep track of them all. Her feet burned from the hot floor, but she refused to let it break her concentration. Then a high-pitched sound filled the air around her station. It pierced her ears, making it hard to think. Samantha grimaced but kept working. From the corner of her eye, she could see Kraz making rapid progress. His fingers moved with practiced ease, as if he had done this many times before. "He's solved these kinds of puzzles before," Lisa said in her ear. "The Confederacy champions train for centuries." Samantha worked faster, ignoring the heat and the noise. She was about halfway through the puzzle when Kraz finished his. "Confederacy champion completes the trial," announced the arbiter. Samantha kept working. Even though Kraz had finished first, she could still score points by completing her puzzle quickly. The heat increased. The noise grew louder. Now bright lights flashed around her, another distraction designed to break her focus. In the audience, Captain Wright watched anxiously. He knew Samantha was brilliant, but this puzzle was designed for alien minds with centuries of experience. 10 minutes later, Samantha finally solved the last part of the puzzle. The screen flashed green. "Earth champion completes the trial," the arbiter announced. The scores appeared above the arena. Kraz, 95. Samantha. 68. The second trial is complete. The Confederacy champion is victorious. Samantha wiped sweat from her face as the heat subsided. She had lost, but she had completed the puzzle. Many new species failed to finish it all. With the score tied at 1 victory each, everything would depend on the mysterious final trial. As Samantha walked back to the preparation room, her earpiece suddenly crackled with a new voice. "Lieutenant Miller, this is Gregory Peters. Do you copy?" "I hear you," she said quietly. "I've decoded more of the message," he said, his voice urgent. "The spirit trial isn't what they claim. It's not about testing your worth. It's about collecting data." "Data? What kind of data?" "I'm not entirely sure, but I think they're scanning brain patterns, emotions, decision-making processes. The Confederacy needs something from new species, something they've lost." Before Samantha could ask more questions, Ambassador Zrel entered the room. "The final trial will begin shortly," he said. "I must say, you have performed better than expected, Lieutenant." Samantha studied his face. "What is the spirit trial really about, Ambassador?" Zrel's vertical eyelids blinked rapidly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do," Samantha replied. "There's more to this duel than determining our rank in your Confederacy." For a moment, Zrel seemed to consider his words carefully. Then he said, "The spirit trial reveals truth, Lieutenant. Sometimes even truths we ourselves do not wish to see." As he left, Captain Wright approached Samantha. "What was that about?" "I'm not sure," she said. "But Gregory's decoded more of the hidden message. The spirit trial isn't just a test. They're collecting data from us." "What kind of data?" "Brain patterns, emotions, how we make decisions." Samantha looked toward the arena, where preparations for the final trial were underway. "Whatever this last challenge is, it's the real reason for the whole duel." A chime sounded, calling the champions back to the arena. Samantha took a deep breath. "Ready or not," she said, "here we go." The arena fell silent as Samantha and Kraz returned for the final trial. The maze and stations were gone. In their place stood 2 clear chambers, each about 10 feet tall. "The spirit trial begins," announced the arbiter. "Champions will face their greatest fears while attempting to reach the activation button on the far side of their chamber." Samantha glanced at Kraz. For the first time, the alien warrior looked uncertain. "The chambers will create illusions based on your own mind," the arbiter continued. "They will feel real. The challenge is to complete your task, despite what you see and feel." Samantha entered her chamber. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss. Across the arena, Kraz did the same. "Begin," said the arbiter. At first, nothing happened. Samantha took a step forward. Then the air around her shimmered. The clear walls of the chamber disappeared. She was somewhere else. Orbital Station 4. She recognized it immediately. The place where her brother had died 8 years ago. Warning alarms blared. Red emergency lights flashed. The station was breaking apart, just like it had on that terrible day. "This isn't real," Samantha whispered to herself. But it felt real. She could smell the burning electronics, feel the station shudder beneath her feet. A voice came over the intercom. "Emergency in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." Sector 7, where her brother had been working. Samantha knew this was just an illusion, a test. All she needed to do was walk straight ahead to the button. But in this reality, that path led deeper into the damaged station, away from safety. She took a step forward, then another. Ahead, she saw people trapped behind a fallen beam. They reached out to her, calling for help. One looked exactly like her brother. "Please," he called, "don't leave us." Samantha froze. This was the choice her brother had faced: save himself or try to help others. He had chosen to help and had died when the section decompressed. The logical choice was to ignore the illusion and go straight to the button. That would win the trial. But something deep inside her couldn't do it. Instead, she moved toward the trapped people. "I'm going to help you," she said, knowing they weren't real but unable to ignore their suffering. She reached the fallen beam and tried to lift it. It was impossibly heavy. "You can't save us all," said her brother's image. "Save yourself." "No," Samantha replied. "I won't leave anyone behind." She looked around and spotted an emergency jack against the wall. She grabbed it and wedged it under the beam. Using all her strength, she activated the jack. The beam slowly lifted. "Go," she told the trapped people. "Head to the escape pods." As they ran past her, Samantha held the beam up. Once everyone was clear, she let it drop and continued forward. The path to the button was now blocked by flames and debris. The station was collapsing around her. She had seconds to choose: find another path to the button, or help more people she could see trapped further ahead. In the real arena, the audience watched in confusion. On screens above, they could see what each champion was experiencing. Kraz was fighting his way through a battle scene, cutting down enemies to reach his button. Samantha, however, was taking a longer path, stopping to help illusions of injured people. "What is she doing?" Ambassador Israel asked Captain Wright. "She'll lose." In the control room, Gregory Peters burst in, breathing hard. "Don't stop her. The chamber is recording everything: emotions, choices, brain patterns." Dr. Russo looked up from the monitors. "You mean?" "Yes," Gregory said. "The real test isn't reaching the button first. It's how you try to reach it." Inside the illusion, Samantha had helped 3 more groups of survivors. The station was seconds from total collapse. She finally saw the button ahead, glowing on the wall. As she reached for it, the floor gave way beneath her. She grabbed the edge, hanging over an abyss. Below her, she saw stars. The station's hull had breached. With one final effort, she pulled herself up and slapped the button. Instantly, the illusion vanished. She was back in the clear chamber, her hand on a simple red button on the wall. Across the arena, Kraz was just reaching his button. But something strange was happening. Every alien in the audience suddenly went rigid. Their eyes widened. Some gasped. "What's happening?" Samantha asked as she exited the chamber. Captain Wright ran to her side. "I don't know. They all just froze at once." The Arbiter's voice, when it finally came, sounded different. Softer, almost amazed. "The spirit trial is complete," it said. "The Confederacy has received its answer." Ambassador Israel approached Samantha, his movements now different, more fluid, less formal. "For 10,000 years," he said, "we have searched for a species like yours.